Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at creating a function that deletes a directory that has contents. Now, we do have a function in PHP already which is called rmdir. So let's just first of all take a look at what this looks like. It's just literally rmdir, and then inside would be the directory name that you wanted to delete, so the folder that you want to delete. Now this is obviously useful if you're storing, say, images inside a directory somewhere on your site, say for a particular user or an album. There's obviously a variety of reasons you would use rmdir. However, if a directory has file contents, then PHP will not be able to delete the directory and you'll have an error. So we need a way to solve this, and we're going to be creating our own function. This is going to be a recursive function. It's going to reference itself. You can obviously go ahead and read up more on recursion, but essentially recursion is something that references itself, and in this case it will be our function calling itself to essentially loop through or scan through the directory structure and the file structure of a particular directory and delete everything within it. So this won't just delete a folder with contents in, it will delete folders with perhaps folders, subfolders in, or subdirectories that then have content in. So the best way to explain this is to show you an example. So this function as it stands, rmdir, is part of the default PHP function set. Let's go ahead and just create a directory called dir. That is in the same directory as the file I'm working on, so I'm just going to call that dir. Obviously there's nothing inside of this, so this will work. Let's go ahead and load up the browser and we'll refresh the page. So now that should have deleted that directory. As you can see, that directory is now gone. So let's go ahead and create another directory, but this time we'll create a file inside of it and we'll see what PHP has to say about that. So let's go ahead back to our browser, refresh, and you see we've got a warning here. So it hasn't errored, so obviously nothing's going to stop the execution of the rest of our code. It's not going to stop the execution of the rest of our code, but we get a warning saying directory not empty, and the line that this function was executed on, and it's telling us the function and the folder name as well. So obviously now you can probably guess this directory still remains, and we've still got the file inside. So this is a bit of a pain, but we can solve this by creating our own function. And obviously this function can be included in perhaps a function file that you can use across your whole site if required. Probably not, but yeah. So let's go ahead and start looking at creating this function. But first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just create a couple more files in here. And we'll go ahead and create another folder, so subdir, or subdir I'm going to call this. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a file in there, create another subdirectory, and another couple of files in here. So I want this function to be effective, so I don't just want it to go ahead and delete let's say everything inside of here, just the files. I want it to look inside folders within that and then delete them files as well as them folders. So let's go back to our code and we'll start writing this function out. Okay, so I'm going to call this function remove directory. So remove directory, and obviously the a parameter that I need to take is the directory itself, obviously. Now the first thing we want to do is check if this is actually a directory, so we can create an if statement here, and inside here we can use the isDir function, or isDirectory function that PHP provides for us. So isDir directory. So outside of this function we're going to call this the function, so we're going to say remove directory dir. Now we already obviously have the directory called dir, so what will happen is that will pass this here into this variable here, and it will then say is directory. So if that's equal to true, we're going to just echo true. Okay, true, or exists. That would probably be better. So let's go back to our browser and refresh, and you can see that it says exists here. Otherwise it won't. So if I just type a couple of A's onto the end of there, we don't get any result. So it will only carry out this process for a directory that does actually exist. So that's quite important, obviously. Okay, so inside of here is going to be all of our code. So once the directory does exist, we can go and do other things. Now the first thing we want to do is grab the entire contents of this directory. So let's go ahead and create a variable called contents, and I'm going to use the scan directory function that PHP provides for us, and then I'm going to input the directory. Now I'm actually going to go ahead and return this, and that will just return an array of the contents of this directory. And what I can then go ahead and do is I can use a print r on this function. So that's then going to provide me with the array of contents of that. So let's fire up the browser, refresh. And you can see that we've now got an array. The first is a dot and a double dot, which is just part of the directory structure. And then we've got 1.txt, 2.txt, and sub.dir. Now this is where we have to start thinking about recursion, because we want, if we come across a folder, we want to go and delete this folder as well. And therefore we're going to have to go inside of that folder and do the same process over again. So if it's not clear at the moment, it will start to become clearer. And this isn't a particularly long function, so it's not a particularly difficult thing to do. Okay, so inside of our text editor, we want to basically ignore these first two parts of the array, so the dot and the double dot here. So we want to go ahead and unset these. So let's just get rid of our return. And in fact, we can keep that. But we'll do it a bit later on. Okay, so we want to use the unset here to say contents 0, meaning the first element of the array, and also contents 1. So unset can take an unlimited amount of parameters, or perhaps not unlimited, but multiple parameters. So we're unsetting content 0 and 1, and then we can go ahead and return contents, and you'll see that that's removed the first two elements of the array. So now we're only working with files and folders. We're ignoring everything else, i.e. them two dot things. Okay, so now what we want to do is loop through the contents of the directory and base a decision on whether we want to, first of all, delete something, whether it's a file or not. So if it's just a file, we want to delete it, and we're going to use unlink to just delete the file. That's all we need to do. If the current object, i.e. when we look in our browser, this can just be deleted, this could just be deleted, this is a directory, so we'd need to apply the entire process over it again to delete everything within it and then remove the original directory. So we want to go for each. We're going to use a for each loop, and we're going to say for each contents as object. So each file or folder within this directory is now called an object. We want to create a variable inside of this to represent the current object, and we want to do that by applying or taking the directory that we're currently in, followed by a / and then the object itself. So I'm going to say current object equals directory, and then append on a / and then append on the current object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just echo this out and then append on a break at the end. This is just going to give me an idea as I'm going along of how everything's looking. So we don't need the print r anymore, because this is just going to output something. So when we refresh, you can see that we've got dir, which is the original folder that we supplied, followed by the file name, and then the same here, followed by the file name, and then the same but with this subdirectory. So now we've got the actual real location of this. We can go ahead and start to either delete or apply some recursion and call this function again. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to check if the current file type of this object, or the file type of this current object, is a directory. So again, an if statement. We want to say if file type without a underscore, if file type of the current object is equal to dir, so that will return it. In actual fact, it's probably best at this point to it'd probably be useful just to say echo file type current object, and then a break, and that will just show you the object types and their output. So it's always useful to do things like this. So we've got file. This is the representation of 1.txt. This is 2.txt, and this is the subdirectory folder. So we've got file, and directory. So we know that which one's which. So in this case, we're going to be saying if file type of the current object is equal to directory, then what we're going to need to do in this case is call the function again and apply that to the current object. Okay, so if it's a file, we can delete it. So else unlink current object. So if the file type's a directory, we need to apply this entire process again to go through, delete the files within that subdirectory, then delete the directory itself. Otherwise, we just unlink, i.e. delete the current object, which is just a file, because the current the file type isn't a directory. So we're just going to say remove directory current object. Okay, so it's as simple as that. We have got one more line to add, which is extremely important, but for now, as long as you understand, how we're looping through the array of files, grabbing this name, and then we're checking the file type, we're recursing here. We've created a recursive function. So now what we need to do is, once we've finished with the the last directory, we want to remove that directory. So we're going to say rmdir directory. Okay, so now we can go ahead and actually test this. So let's go ahead and open our file structure. I'm going to create a folder called empty. So in this case, I can use our remove directory function on an empty directory. Okay, so if I say empty and I refresh, that will have deleted that directory, even though it was empty. Now previously, remember, we used rmdir on directory here, which wasn't full. This time it's going to use our function logic to go through and completely remove this folder. So we're going to type in dir, the name of our folder that we created with files, subdirectories, files, and then more subdirectories and more files, and we're going to apply that. So we're going to go ahead and hit F5 to refresh, and we can go in and see that that directory has now been deleted. So quite a useful function to be able to write. Obviously understanding the recursion is quite tricky, but as long as you can get your head around on the fact that we're just basically going down the structure or the tree of our files and directories, then we're applying the same function to remove subdirectories, files within that directory being here, then removing that directory. So if you just go ahead and place this function in a file, a global file perhaps, that's included on all of your pages, it's always a useful function to have. So that was the tutorial on deleting a folder with contents and subdirectories using a recursive PHP function.